and Ellen.
Thank you so much, Jen and Alicia, for that warm welcome and for the invitation to speak to Tempo. And of course, thanks to all of you for being here today. You know, as I was reflecting on this presentation, I started to think about how did I get to this point in my career, heading up an institution that's embarking on the largest cultural project in the last quarter century for this community. And in so many ways, I think that my life and my career path led me to this particular point with this particular institution, you know, that re-envisioning of a natural history museum for the 21st century. Next slide. So when I was a child, I just loved to be outdoors. I come from a very large family and we didn't have a lot of money. So doing things outdoors like camping for family vacations and fishing and hiking, those were all accessible to my family. And I think that's what helped me to grow to just love the outdoors. So when it came time to choose a career path, I knew that it would have to have something to do with the natural world and with being outdoors. And where I ended up was becoming a natural scientist, a research scientist. And it was something, in particular, I study amphibians and reptiles, not something that most women take up, but more and more as since I started into my career. But my research took me to other countries. So countries like Paraguay and Belize and the Dominican Republic and Anguilla. And I didn't go there just for a few weeks. I went there and spent months in these places. I was embedded in the communities, working right alongside the local populations. And I believe that this just really helped me to appreciate how diverse this world is, both biologically and culturally. And it also made me understand how connected we as humans are to that natural world. Next slide. So my career path also took me to two museums. As a student at UWM, I got a job at MPM, working in a department and working for a researcher who studied beetles. He'd go off to South America, collect beetles, bring them back to study. And it was my job to get them prepared so he could study them. So I became intrigued with museums and the fact that there's all this research going on in natural history museums behind the scenes and what that means for those museums. So with a degree in hand, I was hired by the Carnegie Museum of Natural History in a very entry-level job. And I worked my way up through the ranks in that museum and at the same time got my PhD at Pitt. And that PhD sent me off to those other countries to study. But I soon discovered that museums were this great place to make science accessible to the lay public. I soon discovered that that was also a passion of mine because through exhibits and programs, making that science accessible made my research even more meaningful to me. So then I moved into those leadership positions, and that helped me to understand that in leadership, I think the biggest thing you do is you bring people together and you set a course for something that individuals alone can't do on their own, but together we can accomplish this. And you also put the resources to that. You have the ability to focus those resources. And so now we move forward to, in the next slide, we move forward to today, where we are redefining this museum. And I believe that all of my background is coming to bear on this new museum. As we explore that intersection of nature and culture, the wonders of diversity, both biological and cultural, as we explore what it means to turn a museum inside out, to really expose that research that few in the community know we even do. And as we explore how the community in all of its many cultures can be part of this new museum. So with that, Katie and I are going to share what we've been doing for the past couple of years and get your involvement in this. So this is a critical project for Wisconsin. MPM is Wisconsin's Natural History Museum, the most visited museum in the state, with more than 550,000 visitors from every single county in the state, including more than 150,000 school children who come on field trips in a normal year from 44 of those 72 counties. This museum is an essential educational institution. Not only do we serve the school-age children, but we serve as an active laboratory for 29 adjunct researchers for university students and other academic partners across the state and country. MPM also reaches the community beyond our walls. In 2019, we held 287 outreach programs engaging more than 25,000 people across the state. This year, of course, we've had to shift to virtual programming, but we've engaged more than 446,000 participants directly in our online programming, and we've reached more than 5.7 million people with our digital footprint. MPM got its start in the 1850s when school children from the German English Academy, which is now the university school, when their teacher took them out collecting specimens on field trips. Those collections grew over time, were stored on the third floor of that school, and they were there until the state actually chartered the museum in 1882. And the public museum was then operated by the city, and it opened to the public in 1884. We are now in our fourth home since then, so it's not scary for the museum to actually move to a no home. We've done it throughout our history. And we've done this as we've needed to expand or change for the community's needs. In the 1960s, the city sold the museum to the county, which operated the museum until 1993, when MPM officially incorporated as a separate 501c3. When the county took over the operations in the 60s, that's when the current building we're in was built. The county-owned building is unfortunately falling apart. A county report that was produced 5 years ago showed that we had $87 million in deferred maintenance on the building. That number today is well over 100 million, and it continues to grow. The condition of the building is jeopardizing our collections, which we hold in care for the community. It's jeopardizing the visitor's experience, and it's also jeopardizing the exhibits themselves. In fact, we've had to close several of them because of water issues in those exhibits. And these are all pictures that you see of the problems that we deal with on an almost monthly basis. Additionally, the costs of operating such a large and poorly constructed building are jeopardizing the museum's financial stability. Utilities and basic maintenance run over $1 million annually, and that continues to increase. And it puts us in a position of just not being able to survive being in this building in the long term. So several years ago, recognizing that the institution was approaching this critical point in its history, MPM faced the question of whether we should just let this institution slip away, slowly slip away, or if we should stand firm on the shoulders of generations of Wisconsinites, including those school children who started those collections, to build something that's even better and more meaningful for our city and state. And thankfully, the board and the staff chose that second option. Katie, do you want to talk about what we're doing now?
Yes. Let's see if I can manage. There we go. So we started bringing the community together to really inspire and inform what the future museum can be. and really to start thinking outside the box. What is it that we want of this museum? And I'm excited to do the focus group a little bit later with you all to get your feedback on this. So through surveys and focus groups and workshops, town halls held throughout the past couple of years, the community is really challenging us to think big about this future museum, not just what the museum is today, but what it can be for future generations of Wisconsinites. Really at the center of the new museum planning is this theme of the intersection of nature and culture. And it's a theme that draws on the strengths of the collections, really the uniqueness of MPM's collections. And it's a museum that speaks to the stories that are critical for our future, stories that live at the intersection of nature and culture. So I'm gonna stop my screen sharing and switch to a video here. So give me just a second. I hope you all enjoy this short video that will help you see our vision.
What is a museum? When you were a little girl or boy, you likely came to a museum with your school or your parents. You might have even come to the Milwaukee Public Museum. Today, more than 500,000 people, including over 140,000 school children a year, come here to see and touch things outside of their world. But museums are changing because the way we learn, process information, and experience our surroundings is evolving. So what is a museum? Is it a place to observe or to engage? Is it a place of the past or a place where science is happening right now to inform the future? Is a natural history museum about the earth, the oceans, the animals, and the galaxy? Or is it about us, humans? How our cultures, our human history, and natural history intersect and intertwine, and how our human future and natural future will too intertwine. The natural world is complex, diverse, wondrous, and life-giving, as are we humans. We all have important stories to share. Now, it's important that stories be told by people from our varied cultures firsthand. Now, for the first time, we can immerse everyone in nature and culture, transporting all ages to a place anywhere in and around the earth or back in time. Now we can remove the walls of a museum, connecting people to document natural history now, to explore our cultures now, to join with other scientists wherever they are now. What is a museum? Is it the past or does it inform our future? Who owns it? Is it owned by the earth? Is it owned by Homo sapiens and vertebrates or stars? Is it curated by science or every one of us? What is a museum? Maybe it's something none of us has ever seen before, and it is inspired right here by you. Welcome to the new Milwaukee Public Museum. Museum Inspired.
All right, give me just 1 second to pull back up here. There we go. Hopefully you can see it. Now I can't see any people, so I'm gonna keep going here. With the community's input, we have outlined 5 building blocks. And these are really the foundation for the future museum. So if you're staying for the focus group after the presentation, we're going to be asking for your feedback on these, so please listen carefully. The first building block is using the past and present to inform the future. And most museums are windows into the past, but we really want the future museum to show how natural environments and cultures have changed over time, so that visitors are inspired to trace what's happening now and what's next for all of us. And Ellen, will you take us through the next couple building blocks?
Sure. You know, as a scientist who's worked in museums for more than 4 decades, I hate to admit that, but it has been that long. I'm, really excited about the second building block, which is what I alluded to earlier, turning the museum inside out. So a museum, it becomes a more active and ever engaging place when you get to engage with the work going on behind the scenes, the new knowledge being created every single day by scientists and anthropologists, making discoveries right in our own collections. The third building block is getting kids and families and citizens engaged in doing science by engaged in doing science at the museum, or led by museum scientists in parks or in natural areas across our state. Whether you're helping us to track firefly species or to monitor bees, you can be part of building our library of life in Wisconsin to preserve for future generations, just like past generations did for us. And we all know that when we get kids involved in the scientific process, we teach them to think critically across all areas of their lives, helping them to grow into good future citizens. Katie, do you want to take 4?
Yeah, so the fourth building block is really building on our world-renowned immersive exhibit experiences that allow experiential learning and literally seeing the world through another's eyes. Our museum was the first on the planet to use dioramas. And in fact, you can still see the first diorama of muskrats in their natural habitats created by Carl Akeley in 1890 in the museum today. Then we exploded the diorama. Think of the walk through Costa Rican rainforest or the Guatemalan marketplace or African bamboo forest. All of these exhibits take you to a real place with real objects, and that immersive exhibit design must be at the core of the future museum experience. But now think what more that experience can be when we layer over the appropriate technologies to make the scene feel even more real, and to hear and be part of the stories told in the voices and perspectives of cultures from across our state and world. The fifth and final building block is relevancy. Our current and future collaborations with universities and other organizations will further extend our reach beyond our walls and make research and our mission even more accessible, benefiting communities, again, across the state and across the world. An important tenet of the Future Museum, and something that we've heard through so many different community engagement sessions, is our commitment to diversity, access, and inclusion. And MPM's visitorship is incredibly diverse, and it's important to include all of those voices in the planning process. And as an entity with statewide research, we're really focused on including people from across Wisconsin as we determine what the community needs from the Museum of the Future. Given the focus on nature and culture, as we develop the concepts for the new exhibits, we'll be working with community members to accurately represent different cultures from their perspectives and not perpetuate colonialist viewpoints of the world. We're also sensitive to the fact that different people have different access and perceptions of nature, and so that needs to be considered in our planning. The exhibits also need to engage visitors in multiple styles and pathways to connect with people of different abilities and interests. So here, again, for the focus group participants, we're going to be talking about these storylines and themes. These are not exhibits in and of themselves, but rather the stories that the Future Museum's exhibits will tell. And so they're themes that are interwoven throughout the exhibit experience. And we have not begun designing any exhibits, but these are really the process of museum design. Exhibit design is really starts with understanding what your themes are going to be, which makes sense. Again, these were defined by community members through focus groups, just like the one that we're holding later today. And I do encourage those of you who aren't participating today to find a way to engage with us in the future, as this process of community engagement is iterative and will continue throughout the planning process. The 5 storylines that we have developed are sustaining life, which really connects stories about systems of sustenance among plants, animals, and people at local, regional, and global scales. The second is migration and habitation, which, not just traces how landscapes form and change, but also explores how plants and animals and people move in search of habitats. Change and evolution explores how change occurs in nature and how life evolves through processes that connect us with the past, inform the present, and shape our future. Forces and relations take a look at at nature's interactions and the many forces that shape our relationships, from the universe to ourselves individually. And ways of knowing is focused on helping visitors explore how different people understand and communicate what they know about the world, as well as how different forms of life communicate. Ellen?
Sure. So we are excited. We hope that we made an announcement a couple of, well, I have no idea how long ago it was, because time these days is way skewed. But we are excited that our new location is at 6th and McKinley, which is right across from the Deer District. And it's connecting all the downtown development to those near neighborhoods. And this location is just a few blocks from our current location, which keeps us in the same neighborhood that we've always been in. We've always been west of the river. And it also prioritizes accessibility. The other thing is we are really excited that this new facility will also house Betty Bryn Children's Museum. Their lease was set to expire about the same time that we plan to open. And so locating together just makes a lot of sense for the community. By co-locating, we both will experience several capital and operational efficiencies, and visitors will be provided with an enhanced experience and will consolidate our capital campaigns for the 2 buildings, needing a home at the same time. And we have always been about trying to make sure that we do what's right for this community. And we know that from the feedback, people really think that this is the best thing for us to do. Katie?
So you may have seen that we recently made a significant announcement about the planning. We've selected the design team for the future museum. We are thrilled to have selected Think Design, which is an internationally renowned exhibit design firm, to lead us through the exhibit design process. Think has an incredible portfolio of work, including the photos you see here of the California Academy of Sciences Steinhardt Aquarium and the Empire State Building Observatory. They've also designed exhibits at the Museum of Science and Industry, the 9/11 Memorial Museum, the National Museum of Jordan, the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, the Seattle Aquarium, and most recently they completed the exhibits of the Dubai Sustainability Pavilion, which just opened a couple weeks ago. Enniad Architects has designed the Utah Natural History Museum and the American Museum of Natural History depicted here, as well as the New York Hall of Sciences, the Shanghai Astronomy Museum, the National Museum of American Jewish History, the Edelman Fossil Park at Rowan University, and the list goes on and on. They have a deep understanding of the natural and cultural worlds and a vision for how those worlds can be an inspiration for a physical building. And of course, many of you know Kaylor Slater, a strong qualified local presence who will ensure a seamless transition from design to construction. Also, the construction manager for this project is Mortensen, and they're teaming up with Alcon Construction, which is a Hispanic female-owned construction company run by an incredible leader named Ana Lopez. Another notable aspect of Mortensen's team is that it has a significant number of females, and women made up half of the interview team, which is something that you don't see very often in that industry. The museum has set very high goals for diversity and inclusion on the project, and we look forward to working with our vendors to include diverse businesses in building the museum.
So you see here is a timeline that goes through 2026 with key milestones highlighted at a very high level in exhibit development, building, and funding. And our plan evolves around breaking ground on a new facility in 2023, which would likely allow us to open sometime in late 25 or early 26. Now, we have talked about most of what we've done. So you'll see our next steps, which are just to the right of the vertical line, are to begin exhibit and architecture design, to launch a capital campaign, and to secure funding from the state and county for the project. So this new museum will be the largest cultural project in a quarter century. You know, it is important for our children in that when I think about it, I think of nearly every child raised in the next 50 years or more in the Milwaukee area and beyond, how they will likely visit this museum and be influenced by it, just like so many people, not just in this community, but across the country, tell me how they visited MPM and what it meant for them and how it influenced them and set them off on career paths. So it's important also for our own legacy, because for each and every one of us on this Zoom call today, when we look back at this day, at this moment in time as individuals, I hope that we'll take stock in what we did to imprint our collective future. So a couple of other things before we wrap up and are happy to take questions. I just wanted to announce, you heard that we are reopening on March 4th. We're going to be open at a limited schedule from Thursdays through Sundays, and we'll monitor that. And as the demand becomes more, we'll extend the times and the days. We do want everybody to know that we do have an approved plan from the health department. And we will be operating with the highest standards for keeping everybody safe. You know, for me, it's keeping the community safe, but also keeping the staff safe. Staff feel very comfortable coming back. And staff felt very comfortable with what we had in place. But we're also very excited this spring an exhibit, this will be the US premiere of this exhibit. We're partnering with the America's Black Holocaust Museum, and we'll be hosting Mandela, the official exhibit, which was made in South Africa with friends and family, in collaboration with friends and family of Nelson Mandela. And it showcases the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela. And we've convened a council of amazing community leaders who are advising us on the programming, on audience engagement, and on educational opportunities that this exhibit will bring to Milwaukee. So stay tuned as we roll out more information about Mandela and the exhibit. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, as long as we have the answers for them.
Okay, Katie, it's Alicia, and I'm going to field some from the chat, and then some that I know people have had, you know, kind of before your presentation. But do you want to touch a little bit on, you know, what I would call signature exhibits of the current museum? I know you're talking a lot about past, present, future, but the streets of Old Milwaukee, where many of us have enjoyed black tie fundraisers or other events, how will some of your signature exhibits move with you or be retired in the next iteration of the museum? And either one of you, feel free to answer.
Go for it, Ellen.
So, we are just starting to explore that. We haven't yet started to do the exhibit design, and that's what we're bringing on the exhibit designers to help us do. The big thing is, remember, we have that intersection of nature and culture, and so I can tell you that there will be elements of what we have going, but we don't know that there will be full exhibits going, because we number one, the exhibit space is less, although our exhibit space is not, there's a lot of wasted space in our exhibits. So when you think about smaller exhibits, we'll be using the exhibit space much more efficiently than what we had, but we haven't yet determined what in fact will go. But the biggest thing is that we do want this focus on nature and culture. And if you actually think about when you go through the exhibits, think about what you see in there, and you see nature and culture. That, in fact, when the building was built in the 60s, I've read the documents from the then director of the museum, and he really had this focus on the intersection of nature and culture. And so we aren't moving from that. What we're doing is actually modernizing that and making sure that what we're doing, these exhibits are stuck in the 1960s design. And so we want to make sure if we have to remember, we're not building an exhibit for us or the museum for us. We're building the museum for our grandchildren and their children. So this is something we're looking to the future, and we have to remember that while we all love things, we grew to love them. We didn't instantly love them. We grew to love them. Parents took us to them, and that will happen in the future too.
Great, thank you. Another question is, relative, so we're going to do this sort of a mini focus group with a smaller group of people who are interested afterwards. How did you find, number one, this is a two-part question, how did you find the stakeholders for your initial focus groups? And then how did you conduct them, presumably via Zoom? And then lastly, what were some of the biggest surprises that you found doing those focus groups?
So I can handle that one. We have engaged thousands of people during focus groups, and that has come through different museum related constituents, but then also people who don't go to the museum and haven't been to the museum in 30 or 40 years. The way that we engaged that group of people sort of beyond the museum family was through a committee of community members, and including some board members who worked really hard at the onset of the last year when we started our interpretive framework development to identify which constituents needed to be involved and how do we get to them. So we spent a lot of time up front. We did actually pull off a few in-person focus groups and some larger ones in March. It was March 11th, in fact. I remember it was 2 days before the world changed, and we were already nervous about holding the microphone and passing it around and spreading out at the tables. It was already starting to become awkward. So we did get some in-person stuff in, but then we did transition to virtual, and it's been a lot of small group conversations. And, from staff and board and docents and donors to teens who have never been to the museum, engaged through different community groups and partners that we have, I'm drawing a blank now, lots and lots of focus groups. And, I would offer, if you have a group of friends that you want to bring together and have a focus group and maybe a wine night, I'm happy to work with you on that, because it really is about asking some of the same questions over and over in different forums. And one of the things I would say is a big surprise was how different people's answers could be to the exact same question, depending on who was in that small group. And particularly related to some of the conversations we've had about the topics or even just the broad concepts of nature and culture, and how different people interpret those concepts was very eye-opening to me. Just to understand the wide variety of people that we have to consider, or the wide variety of perspectives that we have to consider when we're talking about just those two concepts alone.
And I just want to add one thing to that, is that, you know, we are evolving as we talk to people, because this is, you know, the thing that's said is that intersection of nature and culture, but what I think of that has changed and evolved over time because of the discussions with the community. So this is not something set in stone. It really is evolving as we move through this. And so we want people's input on it, because we want this to be the community's museum and the community's voice in it.
So when you talk about the wide range of how people view nature and culture, are there any specific, you know, aha moments or memories that you have that from doing these focus groups with thousands and thousands of people?
Well, I'll say one particular interaction that sticks with me, and this was actually from that March 11th, one of the workshops we hosted on March 11th. We were talking about humans' relationships with food and how we, as different cultures, have cultivated, you know, different diets based on the food that we have accessible. And there was a young woman who is an entrepreneur and runs food trucks, and she was talking about how growing up, her mom had tomato plants, and how that gardening and growing her own food really defined part of who she is. And she was sitting next to a scientist who said, "Did you ever think about the bugs that are on your plants?" And they just went from there and went into a completely different conversation about how that tomato plant to her was cultural and oriented to her diet, and to him it was of the food sustenance for the bugs he was studying. So just, you know, that was just one moment where, you know, the simple idea of a tomato plant means such different and deep things to different people.
Sure. Another,
And you know, that relates to that ways of knowing too, because that's what we want to bring out, is there's so many different ways to know something. And so that area can be so rich in what we present, and so changing too.
right. One of the themes that you both have, you know, touched on is diversity, access, and inclusion. One of the questions that has come in is how might a commitment to equity and racial justice influence the vision for the new museum? Maybe it's how it will or how it has, you know, or already, at least in your process.
Ellen, do you want to start off?
Sure. So, you know, it is going to change the museum internally, because natural history museums and museums in general are, you know, Eurocentric. They tell the white man's version of other cultures. That's what we've done, especially in natural history museums. In fact, there was a tribal member from a northwestern US tribe who had come to the museum, because we care for the collections for so many of the tribes in the museum. And he came and he was touring around the exhibits and with one of our anthropologists, and he said, "Oh my, I've never seen that before in a museum." And the anthropologist is looking, wondering, what is he talking about? And it was this, in our Rocky Mountain exhibit, there is a miner who's pounding away at a rock, and it's a white guy. And he said, I've never seen a white guy on display in a museum before. So especially a natural history museum. You know, our goal is to make sure that this museum is reflective of the community, not just in the stories that are told, but also we've got a lot of work to do on the inside of the museum. I mean, we've got women leaders in the museum, but we don't have leaders of color in the museum. So we've got a lot of work to do. And there's a commitment that we have to be reflective of the community. And that's another reason why we're so excited to be in the neighborhood that we've chosen. You know, we are right on the edge of a neighborhood, and we can provide so much access to the museum, and we can also be embedded in that community. So we are committed to this, and it's a long process that we'll be going through, but we're excited to actually be reflective of the community inside and out.
That's great.
Katie, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just add a personal answer. In fall of 2019, when Ellen and I started talking about this position, it was when she articulated that her vision for this new museum is that every child in this community can walk through it and find themselves in it. And so, you know, it's really integrated into every aspect of this planning, which is why we've been putting such a strong emphasis on engagement, and not just engaging with the museum family, right? But engaging much beyond that and making sure all voices are a part of the process.
The focus groups, how far outside of Metro Milwaukee have you engaged with so far? And is that, you know, part of the future as well?
Yeah, so that has been challenged by COVID. It would seem easy to be able to do it virtually, but we really do need to spend more time outside of Metro Milwaukee. We've had some good engagement, but that is one area that we really need to work on. And hopefully, as we can start to open up a little bit this spring, we'll be able to get more outstate and really do some in-person engagement across the state.
Another question was, you know, certainly some Milwaukeeans will be challenged with change. Some, lots. We won't pick a number. But do you have examples of best practices, other museums that have gone through, you know, this sort of modernization process and lessons learned from it, or things that you're already thinking about in terms of how we're going to kind of cultivate buy-in, stakeholder buy-in to this change? Because it is, you know, what you've described, and even some of the pictures that you've shown are very different and very, you know, futuristic versus just looking in the rearview mirror.
Right. You know, that is one of the things in choosing the exhibit designer and the architects, is they're well experienced in taking museums through these kinds of changes. So, and it really is engaging the community and bringing them along through each step. And that's why there's such an emphasis on this outreach into the community, so that people do feel like that's the other side of it too. So they feel like they're being heard and brought along. The other side of it is internally, we are starting to shift our programs to that nature culture. And so that we start to do it internally and reimagine internally, and then all of a sudden it becomes what we're doing in the new museum. We've already been doing it, it's familiar. So this is a long process. This isn't like we're going to close the doors tomorrow and be in a new building the next. This is a long process. So what we have to manage is bringing people along, but also that anticipation, because everybody's so used to things happening overnight. This is not going to happen quickly. I mean, when we said the 2026, that's a long way out. Of course, in terms of building a museum, it's around the corner. But I think it's really using the looking to others and what they've done, and we're taking those lessons, but it's also having the exhibit designers who've walked people through this.
Maybe there's a number of other questions, but I think I'm getting the hands that we need to wrap up here. But you've clearly chosen some local partners as well as some international partners to help us through this process, to help our city end up with with a facility that we can all be proud of. Is it part of is it a goal of the Milwaukee Public Museum to be recognized internationally? I mean, is that where some of the international talent came from? Or where do you see the Milwaukee Public Museum on a global scale when this is all said and done, like you said, in 2026, which is very fast for a museum, but perhaps feels like a century away for other people who are expecting the instant. Right.
Sure. So, MPM is known in the museum world. MPM has always been at the forefront of exhibit design, and programmatically, it's been leading the charge. In fact, the way we do exhibits, that immersive style, is called the Milwaukee style because it developed out of MPM. And so what we want to do is continue that tradition of being on the cutting edge of doing what's the next great thing for museums. And so that is why we're digging deep internally, but also using those international resources, because in Europe there's a lot more going on than there is often here, especially in museums. So we want to make sure that we're capturing that, but having it grounded in Milwaukee, so that what we do is in fact is forward thinking, but also not so forward thinking that this community doesn't understand it. So I don't know, Katie, if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think, there's no pressure, right? We have this legacy that we need to manage to take to the next level with this project. And certainly we have aspirations to do so.
So as we bring it back local, and I know we're going to break off into the focus group, but two questions came in. One was about kind of the synergy or lack of synergy, or probably synergy with Discovery World, but then also with co-locating with the Betty Brinn Children's Museum, the lens on, much younger children. So if you want to just talk briefly, and then Jen's gonna hop in and hook me, but on engagement, interaction with both Discovery World, which is obviously on, a different museum campus, as well as with Betty Brinn, who you'll be co-located with.
Right. So, we have, one of the good things that's come out of COVID is all the museums have partnered together. That's why you saw the announcement of our opening included all the museums. We have been since we shut down, we've been in weekly phone calls about how we can partner together, how we can build each other up and not be in competition with each other, how we can really do what we do best and let the others do what they do best, but collaborate on the things where we have an intersection. And in terms of Betty Brinn, we're thrilled to be able to, we've already started to talk. They've started to understand what our resources are. We, of course, we have within our museum that early learning, but now having this early learning institution sitting there, we see such synergies with that. And we also see for families, you usually don't have just one age of children, you have a span of children. And so coming to this one building that can serve all of the family, we think is just a win-win-win.
Wonderful. So thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Alicia, for moderating today's session. So many questions. If we do have time to get through some of them during the focus group session, maybe we can answer those. So I know some of you will be splitting off, but if you are interested in being part of that focus group discussion, please stay with us for the next half hour just for some quick upcoming Tempo notes. We do continue with our virtual Tempo Talks programming next Friday, March 5th. The world of consumers has changed how marketing strategies have adapted. So 3 of our wonderful Tempo members will be presenting on that. And then join us for our March program meeting on the 3rd Thursday of the month, March 18th from noon until 1, where we will welcome County Executive David Crowley and Commissioner Lafayette Crump for a new local leaders tackle new and old challenges. So thank you, Ellen and Katie, for today's session. Really incredible discussion, a lot of great questions. For those of you staying with us for the focus groups, a lot more feedback to provide to Ellen and Katie, and we will continue with that part of the program.
Super. So I think we've got some people dropping off. And then Katie, are you bringing up, you need to get us all schooled up on our interactive technology. We're going to be using 2 devices, folks, both our phone and our computer, if I'm correct, right, Katie?
Yes, so I'm going to give instructions.